Chapter 29. Into the Woods. James walked along through the wasteland, taking in all the destruction around them. Wolfgang Strothmann was no liar. The Germans had razed all the land between Chateau de Bois and their Siegfried Line. Every house had been put to the torch or blown up. Wells had been filled in with dirt and debris. Bridges demolished, even the small ones that only required them to hop down and wade through little creeks. They had done everything they could, the necessary along with the vindictive, to stymie the British, French, and soon the American forces in their advance. As they walked beside a wheat field that had been burned black, James glanced over at Jonah Unger. There was some sadness in his eyes. "You all really know how to lay waste to a place, don't you?" Jonah did not understand. He shrugged his shoulders. James shrugged back at him. "Never mind. It ain't important." Isaiah jogged past them, intent. He was headed for the front of the column where Renoir and Durant led. "Wonder where that boy... the corporal's off to." Jonah shrugged. "Ich weiß es nicht." "Yeah, I don't know neither." Renoir, Strothmann, and Durant turned as Isaiah reached them. "We got somebody coming up behind us, Sergeant Major. Half a mile back. Looked like Jerry's," Isaiah said. Renoir and Durant shared a look. "Alive?" asked Renoir. Isaiah scratched at his beard. "I can't hardly say they're walking, but that don't seem to make much difference these days." Durant looked back the way they'd come. "They see you?" "Hell no." "We should wait for them," said Strothmann. The rest of the company began to pull even with them. "What's going on?" asked Caitlin. "Jerry's coming up behind us, miss," said Isaiah. Strothmann continued. "These are the first living people we have come across since Friday. I think it would be foolish not to try to find out what they know, what they've seen. If they are my countrymen, they may have already been to the Siegfried Line." Renoir sucked his teeth. "I don't agree. Let's shelter and allow them to pass. Then we might observe them and determine the best course from there." Durant nodded. "Makes sense." The burned-out remains of a barn were not far off the road. Renoir led them to it, and they settled into cover. Renoir, Strothmann, and Durant watched the road from concealment while the rest hunkered down. It was not long before a column of German soldiers marched in loose formation past them, led by a weary, 5'4" sapper named Rupert Fuchs. They had been marching for most of the day at a steady clip. They were more than 3/4 of the way to San Quentin when Becker called a halt. Anton Schloss, possibly Becker's best fighter, approached his commander. "Sir, I believe we are being followed." Becker's glanced back the way they'd come. He gave his troops a nod, and they began unlimbering their rifles. Renoir and Isaiah had been on point. They'd kept fairly far back from the Germans in an abundance of caution. Their mistake was in closing too much ground when the Germans halted to rest. Renoir knew it was possible that he had been seen by the rear guard. There was nothing to do but hope for the best. He and Isaiah dropped back. They led Durant and the others off the road, sheltering the brush. When Renoir ranged ahead again, nothing seemed amiss. He watched from concealment as the Germans finished their meal, then marshalled at their captain's command and moved out, soldiering on eastward. Renoir went back for the others and they pressed on, more cautiously now. Francois was bringing up the rear when it happened. There was a sharp crack of a Mauser machine pistol, and behind them rushed German shock troops, weapons raised, shouting at the companions to raise their arms and surrender. Captain Paul Becker and his troops came back around the bend at a steady run to to join the men who had lain in wait. Durant raised his hands, and the rest followed suit. Within moments, they were disarmed and seated back to back on the cobblestone road. Becker contemplated what to do with this odd assortment of prisoners. He pointed to Wolfgang and waved him curtly to stand and accompany him. Hauptmann, ein Wort. Captain, a word. Wolfgang stood. The two men walked some distance from the others and began to talk. From the distance it seemed cordial, a meeting of equals. It was not. Rupert listened discreetly from a few yards away. Becker was a study in cold formality. Report, Captain. Wolfgang saluted. I'm Captain Wolfgang Strassmann, 1st Guards, 5th Infantry. My machine gun squad was tasked with holding the line east of Longueval, while the regiment retired to the Siegfried Line. We held against the French as long as we could, then were captured. When it all began, Corporal Unger and I were freed by the smaller Black Legionnaire. We have travelled with them ever since. Becker looked at him skeptically. When you say it's, what precisely do you mean? Wolfgang paused. He realized how insane what he was going to say would seem, but he said it anyway. The dead, sir. It was Becker's turn to pause. He looked Wolfgang up and down, waiting for him to finish the sentence fragment. Yes, go on, the dead what? Wolfgang swallowed involuntarily, then continued. The dead who are hunting us, killing us. You must have seen them. Becker sighed. Was the man shell-shocked? Obviously. A shame. He seemed a decent man. To be sure, he had been through some sort of ordeal, but a broken man was a weak man, as far as Becker was concerned, and a weakness was unacceptable. Captain, if you are their prisoner, why were you armed? Wolfgang pressed on. It is impossible that you have not seen them. They have been hunting us at night since midnight on Friday. We've been lucky to escape them so far, but it's been just that luck. We're wasting time here. We must reach Siegfried Line before the sun sets. Or they will catch us on open ground and kill us. And these dead are what? Vampires? Becker was tired, or he would have been able to hold in his laughter. It was impolite to laugh at a man who was sick in the head, but exhaustion and the ridiculousness of it all overcame his sense of decorum. His laughter roared. Wolfgang realized that what he was saying sounded ridiculous, or worse, insane, if Becker had not actually witnessed it. Becker regained control of himself. He waved to Albert Schloss. Take him back to the group. Bring me that corporal. Albert saluted and grabbed Strassmann by the arm. Wolfgang held his ground. Sir, I have not lost my mind. I know what I have seen. It is possible that you have not witnessed it yourself. Perhaps it is on a smaller scale than I've been imagining it to be, but haven't you seen anything bizarre since Good Friday? Rupert had been listening to the exchange with rapt interest. He thought of the strange death of the last pair of German shock troops in the Marne. He saw Dr. München vivisected in his dugout. To his eyes, Wolfgang seemed earnest, if somewhat distraught, but he seemed to have some hold of his sanity. There was a truth in his words at some level, and the reverberation of that truth sent a chill through Rupert. They had been buried beneath the ground since Good Friday. If there had been anything to see since then, they could not have seen it. He watched as Strassmann was pulled back toward his companions. It required another pair of Becker's troopers to force him to the ground with them. Then they pulled the skinny German corporal with the Iron Cross to stand and walked him over to Becker for questioning. The Jewish corporal had nothing to add beyond describing the monsters chasing him as golems, which tickled Becker again and had him laughing out loud. After he was done with Jonah Unger, who at one point tried to slap out of whatever dementia had taken hold of him, an effort that failed utterly, he moved on to Sergeant Renoir. By then, he lost his patience and his sense of absurdist humour. After Renoir finished regaling him with tales of slaughter and an armée des morts, an army of the dead, a quiet fury had begun to take hold of Becker. He dismissed Renoir, then stewed for a moment as he decided what to do. Isaiah Taylor watched as Renoir was forced marched back to join the other prisoners. Isaiah spoke quietly to no one in particular. We ought to just shot these motherfuckers on the road while we had the chance. He watched the German that has his Lewis gun over his shoulder, and it did not take much analyzation to realize that there was no way to get to the gat and bring it to bear before these hard German boys dropped him in his tracks. It was not difficult for a seasoned fighter to recognize that he was in the company of like-minded individuals, and Isaiah was pretty sure that these German gents would be just as happy to shoot his black ass as he would have been to torch their pearly white ones. They looked pretty crackerjack as far as soldiering went. Isaiah knew that would definitely not count for shit once the sun went down, but for now, it kept him in check. Renoir was shoved back to the ground next to Isaiah. You will not listen to reason. Isaiah smiled. If he ain't seen it, it don't sound like reason. It sounds like you lost your damn marbles, I bet. Becker had apparently finished his internal conference. He walked back to the group and stood over them, hands on his hips. He pointed to Strothman and Unger and motioned them to join Albert Schloss. They rose and stood in front of him. Then he helped Caitlin and Dr. Halstead to their feet, separating them from Durant, Renoir, Isaiah, James, and Francois. Becker waved Rupert Fuchs over to him. Corporal, I want you and your sappers to deliver the doctor and nurse to the Red Cross. You can arrange their return to the British. Yes, sir. They have headquarters at Ham. Rupert saluted. Yes, sir. Go. Rupert signaled for Hans Steele and Tedrick Christensen to fall in with him, and he gingerly got Caitlin and Halstead into motion. They chose the road south and headed for Ham, while Becker crossed to Durant, Renoir, Francois, James, and Isaiah. Caitlin glanced back over her shoulder. There seemed to be nothing to be done but bow to her captor's will. Becker addressed the group of former combatants in English. Gentlemen, you are my prisoners, and I will treat you with the respect you deserve. If you attempt escape before we reach the prison camp, you will be shot. Is this understood? Renoir replied in German. Captain, you are making a mistake. Silence, Sergeant. Do not test my patience. If I choose to execute you here and now, it would be a crime, but it would not be criminal. You have lost your minds. Delusional. It would be mercy. He walked to where Corporal Anton Schloss and Corporal Thomas Larson were guarding Wolfgang Strothman and Jonah Unger. He sighed deeply. It pains me to do this, Captain, but I am certain that you feel shame at your condition, and this will end that. I will make no official report, and your family will assume that you died an honorable death at the front. I sentence you both to death for treason and dereliction of duty, the sentence to be carried out forthwith. Jonah gasped. The troopers behind Wolfgang grabbed him and pulled his arms behind his back. Their hands were bound with cord. Take them into the woods, then catch us on the road. Anton Schloss and Thomas Larson saluted, and the two remaining groups, the prisoners and the death-sentenced, separated as the evening shadows began to lengthen and coalesce into nightfall.